Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, imagine this. You're currently enjoying something at your house. Maybe you're watching TV or eating something else. But then there's suddenly a knock on the door. Of course, like a normal people would, they will go to the door, check who's there. And then you see, oh, it's a government official. And then you wonder, why are they at their house? You haven't really done a crime or maybe anything else that flags the government. But then the government official suddenly tells you, hey bro, pack up your life, pack up your everything. You need to leave this house now and then leave the area because this area is prone to disaster. Why? Because they just realize it's easier and cheaper to move you than it is to protect you in that area specifically. When a state faces the predictable wrath of nature, in this day and age where every area is essentially very dangerous because of climate crisis, it stands at a crossroad. It can choose either to fortify the place where humans have chosen to live their lives for thousands of years, or they can just instead treat their citizens like a cargo ship where they can just move them freely around the map, like from point A to point B, while in an attempt trying to run away from the climate crisis. On such a proposition, we believe that the state's primary duty is to fortify, not to flee. Let's be very clear about the boundaries of this debate. As a value of judgment, we are arguing about the state's core priority and philosophy. We are not saying that immigration or relocating should be illegal. I mean, like, imagine your house suddenly second to the ground. You should have voluntary relocation available to you, but that should be a last resort instead. What we are saying is that the default setting of the state policy, where the money, engineering, and planning shall go first into mitigation instead of relocating. Mitigation means building like seawalls or reinforcing schools to fight against the earthquake, or maybe restoring mangroves, or maybe creating the early warning systems that allow people to stay safely where they belong. The method for this run is very simple. Which priority protects more lives while preserving the basic dignity and the livelihoods of people? My first argument is very simple. You cannot protect a person by destroying everything that gives their life meaning. When the opposition talks about relocation, they talk about it as if they're just moving bodies from point A to point B. They assume land is interchangeable. But in the real world, is it really like that? The communities living in disaster-prone areas, like for example, coastal fishing villages, agricultural valleys, and indigenous lands, are deeply tied to their geography. Their survival strategies, their jobs, and their entire social safety nets are anchored to that specific soil. There's history and culture, identity to that soil specifically. When you prioritize relocation, you trigger three massive human harms. First, you destroy livelihoods. For example, imagine you're a fisher. You were first living in a coastal fishing area, and then suddenly you move 20 miles into a city. But then you realize, damn, I'm useless now. I don't have any skill that I can use here. You basically turn them into self-sufficient people, into dependent victims of state charity. Secondly, you shatter social safety nets. In vulnerable communities, survival depends on your neighbors. It's the informal childcare that they provide, the shared tools, the trusted friend who helps you in a crisis. Those are the part where they depend on in their area. Relocation scatters these networks that they've made. The state might give you a new roof, but it cannot give you a new community or help you build a new community in the place you move to. Third, the trauma displacement. There's a specific documented psychological grief when people are forced off their ancestral land. It breaks the social contract and destroys any trust between the citizens and the government. Let's look at historical examples that we've seen before, okay, of mass relocation. It's like, for example, the early transmigration projects in Indonesia, or the top-down climate movements and parts of the global south. When people were moved away from their ancestral land, they didn't find safety at all. They found structural poverty, unemployment, and deep social isolation. Otherwise, in mitigation, it respects human dignity. It says your home is worth fighting for. It uses the power of the state to adapt the people to the environment instead of forcing them to warp their lives around the defeatist role. And then, second argument. Relocation is a logistical fantasy that fails in practice, while mitigation actually has proven historical works. Let's look at the mechanics of what happens when a state prioritizes relocation, okay? Where do these people actually go? The state cannot afford to buy prime real estate in the safest, wealthiest part in the country. Like for example, in Jakarta, there's literally a picture where you can see where rich people and poor people. I'm not trying to hate, right? But you can clearly see there's two parts, and what we are talking about is that most probably that the people that are moved into the cities, they're probably going to get moved into that part of the city instead. They can't really make sure that the people live in actual good life condition. This creates what we call shuffled risk problem. In an era of unpredictable change, risk moves, you might relegate the community away from a resting coastline, only to place them in a state like with many more flash floods or severe droughts that they haven't really experienced before in their area. The state hasn't saved anyone, it has just spent its entire budget to move people from one hazard to another. Like for example, I mean like in area of Kalimantan maybe, then we could just move them to Jakarta. Jakarta is not safe as well. There's many floods that have happened and droughts maybe haven't really happened much, but it has happened before. Even worse, because people cannot find jobs or community in this poorly planned relocation site, like I've said before, they return. They go back to the disaster-prone areas because that is where the fishes are, that is where the crops grow, and that is where the families are buried, right? But when they return, they are now in a world with zero infrastructure because the state has spent all its money in moving vans instead of building defenses. Compare this to the world of mitigation. Let's look at Japan, for example. It sits on the volatile seismic fault lines on Earth. Japan's response was not to move people away from Tokyo. They instead mitigated the area. They engineered early warning networks, strict building codes, and massive underground water systems. They live with the risk and they survive it. They don't warp around the problem. For example, we can take Bangladesh. Decades ago, cyclone routinely killed hundreds of thousands of people along the coast. The government didn't try to move them away from their area. They just made more places that are more safe against those cyclones. So, in conclusion, panel, let's weigh the two worlds at the end of this debate. Said opposition offers a world of retreat, a state that surrenders to nature, packs its bags, and leaves its own territory behind. The world leaves people culturally displaced, economically broken, and structurally impoverished. Side proposition offers a world of resilience. We use human ingenuity, engineering, and policy to stand our ground. We protect the lives and livelihoods of our people, ensuring that their future is built on safety, dignity, and hope. We are incredibly proud to propose that the state should focus on mitigation instead of relocating people instead. That is all. Thank you very much.